Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this special presentation this afternoon. Thea Burrell's joined us from the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy as well, future energy strategies. And as I say, I focus on Rob and I have been working, the team's been working with Theo for the last 6 months or so. And take this from virtually nothing, Theo, was it, to what's exactly going live for us on Monday. We're very excited. I told Theo, in fact, there'd probably we might get 3 or 4, maybe 5 people come and join us for this presentation. So delighted to have everybody.
Expectations were set correctly.
I know, that's right. But I think it's actually a reflection, Theo, of the interest, not only in the fact that our administration of this scheme, but broadly solar and what it really means. I don't think you can turn on TV too many days without having some reference to electricity or solar or the future in this space. So it's a pretty sexy subject, and I'm sure you'll be able to give us the appropriate sex appeal today. So the insights today, Theo's going to talk to us about the industry itself, to understand what's actually happening in the industry, what the future of the industry is, and maybe debunk some of those other things. You all see advertisements in the paper every day about trying to sell solar panels and batteries and goodness knows what else, and there's a lot of jargon there, and your eyes start to flip round, and of course for Theo, he understands every single component of it. Now, we don't necessarily need to know everything that's on here to be able to administer the scheme, but I think it's just good basic knowledge to actually have, either personally or alternatively when you're on the phone with a prospective client, the fact you understand what they're referring to. So with that in play, thanks very much, Theo.
No worries, thanks, John. Is there a way to get the slides bigger? So I just pulled a few slides together, mostly just to keep me on track. And I'm just going to try to give you guys a bit of a rundown of the industry, some of the lingo, who's who, how solar works, how you go about getting a solar system, and a few other things along the way. So I'll start with go for it. A bit of a scene setting, how much solar there is in Queensland. So Queensland's actually got the most solar of any jurisdiction in Australia. So we're at about 490,000 systems. The vast majority of those are on rooftops. So that's a lot of solar. It's about 1 in 3 detached dwellings. So I'm betting that there's a number of you in this room based on that stat that already have solar. It's 2,088 megawatts, which is kind of hard to fathom what that is, but that means it's the largest. If you combine all of that up, it's bigger than any other generator in the state. So the next largest, I think, is Gladstone. It's about 1,800 odd. So there's a lot of solar. But I guess the thing around solar is, obviously, it only generates during the day. So it's how much energy solar puts into the electricity network is limited by that factor and can cause some issues along the way because the sun's coming down and we all get home and turn on all of our appliances. So it's an interesting space to be in that sense. And what we're seeing sort of over the last couple of years and really emerging now is battery storage. It's had a lot of hype. Everyone's pretty excited about battery storage, but it's still fairly expensive, I guess, is the main thing. There's around 2,000 batteries in Queensland. So when you compare that to almost 500,000 solar systems, you can see it's still fairly small pickings. And there's about 100 systems added per month. So for this program, we're going to have, the public number is 1,500 battery-related assistance packages. That'll probably end up being a touch over 2,000 if all goes well. So we're talking somewhere between 15 and 20 months worth of demand being brought forward. So even though it's small, people are interested in it. I think this will be very popular for that reason. All the time we hear about batteries, and then people go, oh, it's all just a bit too expensive. So a bit of free money in the grant and interest-free finance is going to make it very popular. I'm going to jump to the next slide, Lauren, thanks. So I'll talk a bit now about who's who and the lingo before I get into how it all works. So I've just dumped a ton of words up here. Apologies for that. It's just so I don't forget anyone. So I'll start with the Clean Energy Council. They're the peak body for renewable energy, including solar. And the renewable energy industry is largely self-regulated. There's a little bit of formal regulation, but the CEC does a lot of that work for the industry. So they work on accrediting installers to make sure they're doing everything by best practice. And they also have approved solar retailers. So the difference there is an accredited installer is the actual person who climbs up on your roof and connects it all together. And it's more of a technical requirements for them in terms of making sure it's safe, it's done correctly, it's following all the standards, all of those kinds of things. The approved solar retailer, on the other hand, which is something that we're requiring providers to be for this program, it's more about people selling the systems, maintaining the system. So it's about following best practice in how you sell, offering warranties rather than just going, oh, go talk to the manufacturer in China, that's their problem. It's not our fault the system's not working. So it's about getting best practice there in the way they treat customers and the way they quote, not putting in systems that they would reasonably expect are going to fail quickly. We've had a bit of that in the past. A lot of that's washed out now. But by picking approved solar retailers for this scheme, we're getting sort of that gold standard of suppliers who are going to do the best thing for all of the customers participating. I've got next, that should say Energex, Energex, Ergon, and Energy Queensland. So they're the network distributors. They're the guys that run all the poles and wires on the street, and they have to approve a system being connected into their network so that they know where the power is coming in and out and they can manage that. There's often a fair bit of confusion about who's who there. Energex runs the Southeast Queensland network, so basically goes out to part of Toowoomba up to about Noosa, Gympie, and the rest of SEQ. And Ergon Energy runs the rest of the state. They've both recently come under an umbrella corporation called Energy Queensland. So there's lots of Energy Ergon names there. It gets a bit confusing, but they're largely behind the scenes. Not many people know who they are because we don't really interact with them day by day. Who we interact with more is the electricity retailers. So that's your Origin, AGLs, Energy Australia, Alinsa, Ergon Energy again, which brings in a bit of confusion because Ergon Energy is one of the few that both runs a network and has a retail business. So all of your retailers, that's who you buy your electricity from. A lot of them actually sell solar as well because they worked out pretty quickly that solar was undercutting them, so they might as well just get a bit of that business. But they're not likely to be involved as retailers in this scheme because they're not approved solar retailers. Their organisation's just a bit too big to be able to get through the bureaucracy required for approved solar retailers. So it tends to be more medium and small guys that fit into that. Your retailers are also who you sell excess solar to, and I'll touch on that a bit further later. But so they'll provide your bill, they'll show you how much solar you've sold to them on your bill, and they'll also sell you electricity. I'll touch more on how they charge for that and how you sell solar to them in a bit. I've got then Tesla Powerwall, LG Chem, lithium, lead acid. These are all battery terminologies. So Tesla, a lot of you have probably heard that. They're really big in the media. Elon Musk has always got something going on. They've been a real price setter in the industry. They've come out with a lot of really cheap, or relatively cheap compared to what batteries were, products, and they've sort of pushed the industry down that cost curve. LG Chem, so that's the name of the battery. It's made by LG, company that makes fridges and TVs and everything else. They're sort of the two market leaders. They've got a similar product in terms of the technology and price, and that's lithium is the technology type, so lithium-ion batteries. What it always used to be was lead-acid batteries, which is more like the batteries that you've got in your car. We're not allowing lead-acid into this scheme. It's an older, dirtier technology, has a lot more limitations on how it works, how much power you can put into it, out of it. Lithium is a lot, they talk about energy density, basically how much power you get for how heavy it is. You get a lot more lithium power into a lithium battery than you do into lead acid, and it's sort of the way the whole industry is moving at this point in time. The next lot of terms are all solar-related terms. So PV is often just what we call solar photovoltaic, solar PV. That's the solar panels up on your roof. Often we'll if we're trying to put it in consumer-friendly language, we'll say solar power, but normally we just say PV. So somebody could just say, I want to get a PV system or I want to get a loan for a PV. That's what they're referring to there. Then what often confuses people, because the terminology is so similar, is kilowatts versus kilowatt hours. It's one that it gets even more confusing with batteries, but the kilowatts is sort of how much power something can produce at any given point in time. So if you have a solar system that's 3 kilowatts, if it runs at full capacity for an hour, it produces 3 kilowatt hours of electricity. So for batteries, which is where it comes up a lot, I tend to think of it as like a water tank. So the kilowatt hours is how much water is in a battery, so how much capacity, and the kilowatts is like the pipe coming out of the battery. So you could have something like a 10 kilowatt hour battery with a 2 kilowatt pipe, which means it will take you 5 hours to empty the battery. Conversely, you can get some batteries that are the opposite, and like they're more used for network support, where you might have, say, 100 megawatt hours, so taking kilowatt hours times it by 1,000, 100 megawatt hours, but its capacity is 1,000, so it just empties in 6 minutes and it's gone. Most consumer batteries, you tend to get them around sort of that 5 kilowatts of output and around anywhere between 6 and 15 kilowatt hours. So most of them will last a couple of hours. So most batteries, people think, I get a battery, I won't need to be connected to the grid anymore. Generally, that's not the case, because it's just not going to be enough for you to be self-sufficient. You'll still need the grid when you drain your battery overnight, or if you get a few rainy days in a row and you haven't got enough solar power to fill it up. So that's sort of, and the last one there is inverter. Don't know how much this would come up, but the inverter goes alongside both solar and battery systems. And I don't know the engineering terms all that well, but basically, I'll get this the wrong way. It produces DC power. The inverter turns it into AC power, which means it can be used in our homes. It's basically its main function. And then the inverters now have a whole lot of extra functionality in terms of recording how much energy is produced or exported from the battery, all of those kinds of things. Feed-in tariff is what the terminology we use for selling power to the grid. So it's feeding in energy to the grid. So a feed-in tariff is how much you pay every time you sell a kilowatt hour into the grid. Generally, that's going to be somewhere between 6 and 10 cents. I'll touch on more on why that is in a bit. And lastly, I've got some weird little 3-letter acronyms at the bottom. CER, that's the Clean Energy Regulator. It's probably not one that's going to come up too much, but they operate effectively the renewable energy target, the RET. And you'll see things like in those ads that you'll see in the paper, you'll see, there's a solar discount, or there's an STC zone something. STC is small scale technology certificates. It's basically the money you get as a discount off your system from the federal government through the RET. And it's sort of a prepayment, if you like, for the environmental benefit the system creates. So generally, you wouldn't see that. You just get told the price is this many $1,000, and in the fine print, it'll say this is after STCs, blah, blah, blah. Generally, there's just a form that the customer will sign saying, yes, all of my STCs from the system are yours installed to do with what you wish, and they just see the final discounted price. So that's a bit of the lingo. There's a lot of it. So people, it gets confusing. It gets confusing for us all the time. Even just trying to put it into plain English for comms work, for trying to explain to people what's what with all these technical terms gets really tricky. I'd say the main ones you're going to see come up is your PV and your kilowatts. So people were talking about, I've got a this many kilowatt system, or I want a this many kilowatt system. I'll talk about what size system's right in a minute. But otherwise, I mean, Clean Energy Council and approved solar retailers, they'll probably come up more when you guys are assessing applications, because all of the suppliers need to be that. The rest of that is really just nice to know. I just thought I'd touch on it so you have some idea, if it comes up, what on earth that is. Go for it. So this is my very technical diagram of how solar works. So basically, you've got your solar panels up on your roof. you've got an inverter, which generally just looks like some sort of beige box on the side of your house. And as I mentioned, the inverter makes the power usable. Generally, well, in a normal situation with solar, when the sun's shining, it'll produce electricity. That electricity can go one of two places. It can either go into your house if you have something using power. So generally it'll power your fridge, and if you've left anything else on, if we're all at work, which a lot of us are, you're not going to use a lot of that power in your house, which means it'll get exported out to the grid and be sold to your electricity retailer for a handful of cents. The thing that I guess is probably a little bit better understood now, but in the early days of solar was that it can only go one of two places. The energy is instantaneous, and without some form of battery technology, it can't be stored. So people used to think, oh, I'm just putting all of my solar power into the grid, and when I come back home at night, I'll just pull it back out of the grid. But that power, when it goes out to the grid, it goes into your neighbour's house or the next house, or whichever one's using the electricity at that time. So it can kind of go one of two ways. And when I talk about how you pick the right system, I'll talk about how much benefit you get from those two different ways it can go. The next slide is similar, but it's with a battery. So the key difference is then, rather than just selling your electricity that's been produced from your solar system to your electricity retailer at whatever price that they're willing to give you, generally there's not much room to negotiate there, you can instead put it into a battery system, and when you get home in the evening, your battery will automatically power your house. So you turn on the stove, turn on the telly and the lights, your battery will start emptying. Depending on that capacity of that battery, how many kilowatt hours, how many kilowatts, will depend on how long it lasts, or whether you also need to get power from the grid. So if you go home and turn your clothes dryer on and the stove on, they're both going to be consuming a lot of power. Even with the battery, you might have enough kilowatt hours there. Because I'm only going to use them for half an hour, but if that pipe's not big enough, it will take all it can from your battery, and the rest will come in from the grid. So all these systems work in an interrelated way. You can pull from the solar panels, from the battery, from the grid, back and forth simultaneously. Generally, there's some form of smarts connected to the battery, and it will tell it sort of a bit of a merit order. You should do this first, then this, then that, based on what's going to save you the most. Normally the grid would be last, because that's what you've got to pay for. Once you put in your solar and your battery system, that power's there for free. Or the marginal cost of it is free. The sun shines when the sun shines. So the next one is...
Theo?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's fine.
I was just wondering if it'd be worth touching on the diverter as well as the other option, or...
Yeah, sure. I can touch on... If you jump back to the previous slide. So the diverter technology, it's interesting. It's something that we're still wrapping our heads around as well. It's not something that's that popular. But what a diverter does generally is it turns your electric hot water system into a form of a battery. So if you think of that little battery symbol as instead a hot water system, the diverter goes, are you using power in your house? Yes, no. If not, rather than sell it out to the grid for next to nothing, let's put that power into your hot water system. So when you get home, your hot water system is full of hot water, and that's available for you to use however you use hot water. The benefit of that is you're not using electricity from the grid to charge up your hot water system. Hot water generally can use up around a third of your electricity costs, so you can get a fair saving out of doing that, and it's relatively cheap technology, especially compared to batteries. I guess the downside compared to a battery is it's all of that power is stored as thermal energy, hot water. So the only way you access it is by using hot water. You can't use your hot water system to power your lights and your telly, but it's a way of increasing the savings from a solar system. It's something that we're playing with for other schemes we've got on the burner to make sure that people are going to be making the savings that we'd like to see them make. So rather than sell power to the grid, let's use it in some way in the house and let's divert it into the battery. The reason it's called a diverter is generally because it has to divert the power onto a separate circuit. So most of us probably have our hot water on like an off-peak tariff. You see on your bill, you've got your normal and you'll have an off-peak tariff. That's because normally hot water, it's just cheaper to charge it up overnight. And when your solar's on your roof, it's connected to your main tariff. So it won't automatically charge your hot water system unless you've got your hot water just connected through in the normal way and you're paying the higher price for it. So a diverter allows the power to go both to your general household load and also to your hot water system if there's nothing to meet in the household load. And it just has some little, smart devices that look at how much electricity you're using and just says diverter on or off depending on where you need the power to go. So that covers that.
And you use
No
those
worries.
in conjunction with batteries. So can you have it go look at one then the other?
Yeah, you could. You generally don't see it happen.
Yeah.
The diverter's much cheaper, but not well known. So a diverter makes a lot more financial sense than a battery if you've already got electric hot water. If you're going to spend the money on a battery, you probably wouldn't do a diverter as well, just because generally speaking, your solar system, you try to size that so that it's enough just to fill up your battery. You could do it, but we don't really see it occur. Yep.
I've got the battery one. When the battery's full during the day if no one's home,
That's right, yep.
does it then get fed into the feed-in tower?
Yeah, that's right. In some circumstances, the network could require you not to feed into the grid. Generally, that doesn't happen for households. It's more for really large systems where putting that much power sort of into the grid on and off throughout a day could cause the network to become unstable. For households, generally, it would just be fed out into the grid. So you meet your household load, then everything less would slowly fill up your battery. Once your battery's full, the rest will be sold out into the grid. So you're making some sort of income off it. This is just a picture of an electricity bill from a colleague of mine in the department. And it just shows, the reason I put this in here is to show when you see solar on your bill. So you can see there's a line in the middle there saying solar feed in 1131 kilowatt hours of export at 51 cents, and you got $576 worth of credit there. That's generally what you would see for somebody who's on the old solar bonus scheme, where you get 44-cent feed-in tariff. Anyone in southeast Queensland, if they're on the solar bonus scheme, they'll probably have a number above 44 cents. So that one's got 51 cents. And that's because the 44 cents is like bonus. You still get the 6 or 10 cents from the retailer. So they just add them together and you get the whole lot. In regional Queensland, so if you see an Ergon Energy bill, it would just be the 44 cents. There's no bonus set up on top up there just because of the lack of competition in that market effectively. It means that they have never had any impetus to do it. So what's interesting is all you see on the bill is solar feed-in. What you don't see is the solar you've used in your house. And the reason for that is your bill is all based around your electricity meter. So when the meter man comes around and reads the numbers on the grid, what's happening, what we call behind the meter, so the solar just going directly into your house, it doesn't actually touch the meter, it goes directly in. So the way you would sort of try to work out how much you've saved, read up the top 15,000 and then 16,000, you would see, so that's saying that they've used, what's that, like 1,200 kilowatt hours worth of energy. If that was your normal amount, what you'd see after you got solar is that would not be going up as quickly. So that might only go up by 600 each time because you're only needing half as much power from the grid. It's difficult because you can't actually just work it out. There's no single line that says this is how much you saved with your solar. It just shows you how much solar you exported. And you can imagine if that feed-in tariff amount was only a tenth of that, instead of getting $500 and something, they're only getting $57. They're going, how have I only saved $57 in a whole quarter? I should be getting way more savings than that because it doesn't show up on their bill. So the way the solar industry generally gets around that now, it's sort of started to come through a bit more popular in the last year or so, is the inverter will actually have some form of monitoring in it, and they'll have like a web interface where you log in and it will say, this is how much you've saved, and the inverter calculates that. But up until sort of now in the last year, that's not been the case. And so we've had a lot of people who get confused about that. They go, my solar's not saving me anywhere near as much as I thought it would be. I've even had people in the energy division come up to me and go, yeah, you're in the solar thing. What's going on? Where are all my savings? Because it's just not obvious. You think, well, this is my bill. I should see how much of my solar I've saved as well. It's that's probably just more of an interesting thing to know. I doubt that would come up too much when GROD is doing its assessments, but the solar feed-in is one that will come up because we do have that eligibility that if you're receiving the 44-cent feed-in tariff, you're not eligible to get any of the packages under this scheme. So, ahead. So, I've touched on a few of these already, but thinking about what's the right system to get. So, if somebody was wanting to buy a solar system, or if any of you are wanting to buy a solar system, you'll see ads in the paper and they'll go, 5 kilowatt system for this many $1,000, or 6 kilowatt system, this many thousand. You know, well, do I need 5? Do I need 6? Like, what's the right size? It's kind of difficult to work out by yourself is the short answer. Normally what we would recommend is that people go and talk to an installer and they'd ask you some questions around, well, are you home during the day? What power, do you have any timers so you can run your dishwasher during the day or put your washing on, that sort of thing? Because the main benefit from solar is using it in your house. Because it means instead of buying power from the grid at anywhere from 20 to 29 cents, you're getting it from your roof. So you save all of that purchase from the grid. The alternative to that, without the battery, is you sell it for 6 to 10 cents. And we get a lot of people complaining about, well, how is that fair? I'm selling it for, let's say, 8 cents, and then I have to buy back power in the evening for 25 cents. It seems really unfair. And it's not something that's super simple to wrap your head around. It's something that we deal with all the time. But in a nutshell, it's because that 29 cents is made up of a whole stack of costs. There's the retailer's fixed costs, all of like their call centers, their billing services. There's the network costs, so they're fairly fixed as well. That's all the cost that is to run all the poles and wires all around our streets. You've then got all of your green scheme costs. They're a relatively small amount, but like your renewable energy target, the cost of the solar bonus scheme came into that, but now the government's paying for that on budget. And what you're left with is the actual cost of generating electricity. So your large coal generators or gas generators generally cost them somewhere between 6 and 10 cents to produce the power. So when you sell power back into the grid, your electricity retailer goes, great, I don't need to go ask a coal generator for power, so I save 6 cents. But when I sell it to the customer next door, I still have to pay the network charges, the green scheme charges, my retailer charges, everything else. So the retailer only saves that 6 to 10 cents. That's where you end up with that's the fair price, fair and reasonable price. It's often called for solar. It's something that unless you're in the energy industry, it's hard to wrap your head around. A lot of people don't get it. But it's important for understanding what's the right size system. Because if you're not home all day and you're selling everything for 8 cents, that's a lot worse than you are home all day, and you can save 25 cents. So depending on that, that will tell you what the right size system is. You should try to right size it for how much you're going to use, ideally. Normally, what we see is that comes out at about 3 kilowatts. 3 kilowatts would be about 12 panels on your roof, roughly speaking. But most of the ads these days, people are just trying to sell the biggest system they can. It's just they can sell you a bigger system, makes them more money. For some, if you're a really large house and with stay-at-home parents and a couple of kids turning everything on under the sun all day, a big system might make sense. Or alternatively, if you're intending to put a battery on, a big system might make sense. So you've got enough power to fill up your battery during the day while you're not home. But for just a standalone solar system, it's generally around 3 kilowatts. And that's one of the reasons why the solar loans that are about to launch are capped at $4,500, because that is about the cost of a 3 kilowatt system. So we're trying to sort of guide the customers to getting an appropriately sized system so they save the most they could possibly save out of their system and get the best benefit out of this interest-free loan. I'll just go back one more time, sorry. I'll just touch on a couple of other things. You'll often see a feed-in tariff. Someone might say, oh, we've got a 16-cent feed-in tariff. Oh, that's awesome, I should sign up for that deal. But the way I've got an extra 6 cents for this much solar energy, and I'm paying an extra 6 cents for this much grid electricity. So you leave yourself well behind. It's quite interesting. And then the last point there is the orientation of the system. A a lot of people go, oh, just put solar all over my roof. And then they go, oh, but my roof faces south, which means it's not going to get as much daylight during the day. You're not going to produce much electricity, particularly in winter. You see south-facing systems produce almost zero power. North-facing gets the most overall power, and then east and west are good if you want specific power in the morning or in the afternoon. So if you're like, oh, well, nobody's home during the day, but everyone gets home at 2:30 and we use power, you might want to orient your system west. It's just something that a lot of people wouldn't think about. Interesting little tidbit. Most installers will just say, let's put as much as we can north facing because you get the most power out of your system. Go for it. So how to go about actually getting a system? So taking away the process with Q-Riders to get an interest-free loan, just somebody out normally getting a system, you would shop around and get a quote. Normally someone will come out to your house or they'll ask you on the phone, what's your house like? What's your roof made out of? Is it 1 story or 2 stories? Because that will change how they fix it to the roof and how much like working at height, workplace health and safety costs there are. Once you get your quote, you go, yeah, I'm happy with that, I'll accept it. Your installer will generally then submit an application on your behalf to Energex or Ergon, the network operators, and say, hey, I've got this customer, they want to put solar on, it's this size, is that okay? For the vast majority of households, that comes back instantaneous and automatically, yep, that's approved. It used to be a slow, drawn-out process. It still is if you want to put on a particularly large system, like over 10 kilowatts. But that's a huge system. If you're a household putting that on, I don't know what you're doing with all that power. It's a lot. So generally, you'll get that network connection agreement. It's super easy. Customer kind of doesn't see that. It's all just done in the background. Then the system's actually installed. That will normally take a day or so, depending on your roof, rain, etc., all the normal things. The next thing is getting a new electricity meter. So what most people are told is, right, your system's on the roof, it's all installed, it's all ready to go, but please leave it turned off until this new electricity meter comes. Because the meters that most of us have, they just have that spinning disc in them to read how much electricity there is. If you turn your solar on with that spinning disc meter, the disc spins backwards. So what you get is you might use so much electricity during the night, the next day it spins backwards and it counts as negative grid use. So you get paid more, you get paid like that 29 cents effectively because it reduces how much. And the networks and retailers don't like that because they want to give you the right amount. So there's a requirement to leave your system off and wait for your new meter to come out.
Theo, what's the time frame for that? Because maybe the applicant's reluctant to actually send us that final invoice until such time as that's connected. And what's the sort of time frame?
Normally within a fortnight is the standard sort of time frame. It's all been thrown up in the air since December last year because it used to be Energex and Ergon would come out and do the meter. Now it's the electricity retailer's responsibility. So they have all these metering providers and a whole bunch of stuff goes on in the background. At the end of the day, it's still normally Energex and Ergon. They just do it through a ring-fenced third-party business that they own. So normally about 2 weeks. But what we generally see, and even the network operators tell us this, lift this up and flick this switch, right? Hint, hint. So people just turn their systems on. The networks realise this. They don't really do anything about it. They've said, well, what are you going to do? People just turn it on. If they're smart, they'll quickly turn it off on the day the meter guys come and go, no, it hasn't been turned on. So it's just sort of one of those things that's come about through the industry because people are like, well, why would I have my brand new system just sitting there doing nothing for 2 weeks? I'll just hit the switch and start getting some benefit out of it. And then once you actually have your new meter properly, then you officially turn your system on, you'll see the savings. Your solar will power your house when you're home, and the new meter is electronic and it records power both in and out separately. So that's when they can work that back on your bill. Oh, you have this many kilowatt hours sold into the grid. So we'll give you this much feed-in tariff credit and it all comes out neatly on your bill. Batteries. Okay, so I touched on a couple of these points already, but so batteries have come a lot cheaper in the last 3 years. They've sort of been, for a couple of years there, they were halving in price each year. So they've come down, there was all this hoo-ha about, Tesla's got a $3,000 battery, was sort of the big announcement a couple of years ago. And people are like, well, hold on, why is I thought it was $3,000. Why is it $10,000? Or which was around the numbers we were seeing in Australia, because it was $3,000 without tax for just the batteries and none of the other equipment you needed to go with it. So it was a bit of marketing spin. So batteries, while they're a lot cheaper than they used to be, they're still quite expensive. You generally see, like the Tesla Powerwall, which is the most popular one, they cost about $12,000 to buy it and get it installed. It's a lot of money. Some of the smaller, like LG Chem batteries, you might get for closer to $6,000. It's still a lot of money when you're getting a solar system for sort of 3, 4, 5,000 to get a relatively small battery. It might only last an hour and a half, 2 hours, and spend that many thousands of dollars on it. So what we find is batteries generally don't make sense financially at the moment. The people who are getting batteries aren't doing it because I want to save all this money. They're doing it for other reasons. So it might be we often see I want to stick it to the man attitude. I'm sick of paying my electricity retail all these big bills. I don't care that this is a bit more expensive than my electricity bill. This is, at least they're not getting my money. It's going into a battery. I'm using clean, green solar power. And that's generally the other motivator. People going, I want to be as renewable, as green, clean as I can. I don't care if it costs me more. I just like to be, have that better environmental footprint. There's cases where batteries can just make sense. So if you get a really cheap battery and you get a $3,000 grant, it'll just make sense. If you are setting up a property, like building a property, and it's not connected to the electricity grid, so maybe it's out in the country a little bit, there's no pole and wire running past your front door, you'll find then that batteries can actually make sense, because while they're expensive, to get Energex or Ergon to come out and run a wire and put a pole in and connect it up to your house can cost $30,000, $40,000. People go, whoa, I'm going to spend $40,000 just to then, for the privilege of spending $500 a quarter on electricity for the rest of my life. I'd rather just buy a battery and have no electricity bills. That's generally where they make sense the most at the moment. But as I mentioned earlier, people are really excited about them because there's been all this hype. So even though they don't make financial sense, people will go, well, they only just don't make sense and prices are going up, so I'm going to get it. Or I just needed something to get me over the line. So an interest-free loan and a $3,000 grant, that'll get me there. Let's do that, and that's enough for them to make that plunge. So we're expecting that to be quite popular. And I've got up there that the standards and regulations have struggled to keep up. I don't think it would surprise anyone to know that governments and regulators are slow-moving beasts. Batteries have exploded in the last couple of years in terms of their interest, in terms of the technologies, capabilities. You've probably heard about the big Tesla battery down in South Australia. It's been doing a ton of really interesting stuff that normal generators just can't do, or they'll do something in a split second that would take a normal generator 10 minutes, and they're going, wow, that makes the grid so much better. In the meantime, there's the regulators going, well, what do we do? What do we allow? What don't we allow? How do we make it safe? How do we not? And to make it safe is an important thing, because these are chemicals inside an enclosure. They can be dangerous if treated incorrectly. So, for example, down in the ACT, they had a similar program. A similar program where they're giving out grants for battery storage, and they said one of the things they were finding there is that they called it, there's no mechanical protection for the battery, which is the fancy way of saying you need to have a bollard in front of it if you put it in your garage so you don't accidentally hit it with your car. Because if you hit it and you break a lithium cell inside the battery, the actual piece of kit holding that energy, there's the potential for it to catch fire, and those things are really difficult to put out. Basically, the fireys will sit back and let your house burn down because they can't put it out. So you go, okay, that's why we're taking batteries seriously. And that's why the battery program isn't launching on Monday, it's launching later in the year, because we're putting all the work in behind it to get the safety and installation requirements right, pre-qualify installers, so that we don't see those issues, or if we do see them, we inspect them, we find them, and we fix them up. Because the last thing anybody wants is a battery catching fire or causing damage to somebody's property, or God forbid, to people in that property. So that's why batteries are coming later. I put like the good example is the Samsung Note a couple of years ago. They had to do that massive recall because the batteries were catching fire because they didn't get the programming right, is my layman's understanding of it. So it was overcharging, and if you overcharge a battery and it gets too much, bang, it catches fire basically, which is not great when you're holding it up against your face like a phone. Equally not good if it's, stuck to the side of your house. And I mentioned like batteries are more confusing just because there's more terminology. There's the kilowatt hours versus kilowatts. That's why I always talk about that water tank example. It kind of makes it a bit more real. People say, well, how much batteries are there out there? I always just say there's 2,000 batteries. Because if you try to say there's this many kilowatts or this many kilowatt hours, there's no real way of knowing what that means. It could vary all over the place. So they're confusing, they're more expensive. The technology, the regulators are still catching up, but they're sexy and they're new and people want them. So it's a really interesting space to be in. And I think despite all those things, the 1,500 odd spots for battery assistance are going to be snapped up like that because there's a huge pent-up demand. And people just want them to be that little bit cheaper or that little bit easier to access. And so an interest-free loan and a few $1,000 grant is gonna have a lot of people just go, yep, sold, I'm in. So that's why we're taking the time to get that right. So this is just a bit of a catch-all everything else. I already talked about power diverters. I spoke about inverters before being a grey box on the side of your house. There's also such a thing as micro-inverters. These are smaller grey boxes, but they basically sit under each individual solar panel. So instead of one inverter controlling your entire system, each panel has its own inverter. It's more expensive. The reason you would do that is it means you can sort of put your panels wherever you want, so you don't need to put them all in a neat line. So if you have a weird roof space, that can work. It can also help with things like if one panel fails in a normal system, that whole row of panels will stop working until you get it fixed. So you go, well, half my system's out now because of one panel. Microinverters means one panel fails, the rest keep working. They're starting to get a bit more popular, but they're still more expensive tech. It's only if you had a weird space roof normally that you would do that. STC zones. So I touched on this earlier for the federal government's renewable energy target. The zones basically just calculate how much money you get off your system, and they're purely based on how much sunlight that area gets. So Queensland is all in, I think, zone 3, except for like some of the west, which is zone 4. The higher the zone, the more money you get, basically. Down in like Tasmania, it's all like zone 1, zone 2, because they just don't get as much sunshine as us. It's something that you see in adverts. This price assumes you're in STC zone 3, yada, yada, yada. It's just the fine print to basically say, if you live somewhere that doesn't get sunshine, the system's going to cost you more because we don't get as big of a rebate up front. And what have we got? So Brisbane versus regional Queensland pricing, that's pretty, I don't think it'd be that surprising to hear that there's a lot more competition in Brisbane, so prices are generally a bit cheaper. In regional Queensland, there's less competition, there might be longer travel times, whatever else, prices can be a bit more expensive. So I wouldn't be surprised to see solar and battery systems costing a bit more in regional Queensland. The sort of offset for that is, ironically, in regional Queensland, electricity costs more. So you actually save more by putting a solar or a battery system in. It's kind of a hard sell to regional Queenslanders. Don't worry, you're paying more for power, so that's good for your savings. It doesn't make a lot of sense. People are like, well, I don't want to pay more. You'll see like some charges, like you'll see words like in this ad that John found, things like 3-phase power or tilt frames cost more. The 3-phase power is just about how you connect to the electricity grid. It's generally 3-phase just means you've got a huge ducted aircon system is the way I think about it. Normally we all have single-phase power. I don't really understand the engineering behind it, but in a nutshell, there's 3 wires all wrapped together going past your house. You get connected to either one of them or all 3 of them. The tilt frame is about, sometimes you see solar panels laid flat on a roof. Sometimes if you have a flat roof, they'll actually tilt the panels up so that they're getting better sunlight. You want your panels tilted at the same degrees latitude as you are on the planet, latitude, longitude, whatever it is. So here it's like 22, whatever it is, 22, 26 degrees. So if your roof's flat, you won't get as much sun hit them. So that's the tilt framing. Monitoring devices I mentioned, generally it's included in an inverter now, but you can get little tap-on things so you can see exactly how much of your solar is going where and work out how much you're saving. And the smart versus dumb meter sort of comes back to that spinning disk meter. It's a dumb meter, we call it, because it doesn't do anything other than spin. Someone's got to physically go out and look at the numbers on it and go, this is how much power you've used. A smart meter is connected to the internet, can be read remotely, just automatically pings all of your data back to your provider so they don't need to come out and physically see your meter, and that's all the meters that are going in now are smart meters. That's a lot to take in, I know, but that's basically what I had to sort of just give you a really quick 101 of everything solar and batteries. But happy to field questions and answer any other things on that or anything else you've been wondering about solar.
Roughly how big would a normal household battery for the 3 kilowatt system that's going to be recommended for normal household?
Yeah.
Are they the size of a hot water system or
Oh,
how big are
okay. Generally, what you'd find is probably around, like, so from the floor of this fridge, something like this high, similar dimensions, yay thick and put on the wall. Some are a bit smaller, some are a bit bigger, but you're talking about, something, a fridge door, up to anywhere from sort of a third to a full fridge door, depending on how big your battery system is. It generally they're either ground mounted, so they put a little slab down, put in there. I think it's like an aircon unit. Either you put it on the ground outside your house, or you put it on your wall. So it's one of the two. Like the Tesla one can either be ground mounted or wall mounted, but they weigh a lot. So the Tesla one, it's like half of this battery door thereabouts, but it weighs well over 100 kilos, so it takes a bit to mount it on your wall.
What's the life of the battery?
Generally 10 years. And so there's a whole lot of assumptions that go into that, but if you used it like once a day, so you charged it up all day, got home, discharged it in the evening when you're using all your power, if you did that every day, it should last you 10 years. It will keep going after 10 years, but it will start to sort of degrade and not hold as much power. 10 years is normally the warranty period, and when we crunch the numbers, we normally find that the payback on the battery financially is normally just a little bit over 10 years. So you go, well, it's got a 10-year life, a 10-year warranty, and it doesn't quite give you your money back in that time frame. So that's why we say it's not quite worth it financially.
You drain it all, don't you? Lessen the life of the battery. Because if with batteries, if you leave them a bit in and you don't actually drain them, doesn't that extend the life of them?
It depends on the technology. So the old lead acid batteries, that's definitely the rule. You basically can't take them below halfway. Yeah. So you've got half the battery that you can never use. Yeah. The lithium batteries, you can basically drain them the whole way down. The smarts behind them will tell it just to leave a drop in there, but that technology allows you to drain it the whole way down, so you get a lot better use of that battery compared to the old lead acid, where you've got to leave them half full, or because I think basically if you drain a lead acid battery, you basically kill it in one go. It's like more or less.
Yeah. Batteries have gauges, full, half full, whatever. Or...
Generally, not on the battery. Generally, you'd see that in like an app of some description. So they'll have some sort of connected app on your smartphone, and you can see how much power is in your battery.
Can they be installed externally? Can they?
They can. The recommendation is not to put them in direct sunlight. So guys back at the office are beavering away on this now as to what exactly those rules are going to be for this scheme. So you wouldn't want them to put them on the west side of your house with the sun beating down on them, because if they get too hot, they can get damaged. But they can go outside, yes.
The former hot water rebate scheme, I don't know if you're involved with that at all.
Not really, but I'm aware of it.
I just, with the majority of power being used for the hot water system, if there was any thought of extending that, or what's the better advantage with this potential rebate?
It's an interesting question. I guess politics is probably the short answer of what comes into it. Is hot water isn't the sexy new technology. The solar and the batteries are. So, like I said, the diverters make a lot more sense. But we're not doing a diverter grant. We're doing a battery grant because that's the new, great-looking Schmidt technology. So they're not necessarily a holistic view of what the best way of doing it is. Yeah.
I'm just thinking if I'm a double income, no kids.
Yep.
Swimming pool and that sort of thing.
Yep.
No matter what size my solar is, it doesn't seem like it's going to be too much benefit from a cost perspective.
So
because I'm going to be still using most of my electricity.
That's right. So what we find with the price of solar as it is now is that it still makes sense to put solar in that situation, because solar is so cheap now that selling it for 8 cents is cheaper than sort of what it costs you per kilowatt hour over its life. but it's only going to be you're only going to be a little bit ahead compared to someone who's actually home during the day. If you have things like a pool, that can help because you can set it up so you make the pool pump run during the middle of the day when the sun's shining, so you don't need to power that from the grid anymore. But if you haven't got a pool, you haven't got any appliances other than your normal fridge and hot water, which without a diverter you can't really tap into, it's really a marginal case as to whether you would get solar. It makes a lot more sense the more you're home. So it'll still, like I said, it'll still pay itself back. It still is sort of economically rational to do it, but you're a lot better off if you can use it at home.
And great for the environment, Tim, which is the main thing.
That 2 kids family pool, whatever.
Yep.
A bigger system would require, say, 2 batteries there, or is a bigger battery, or is it 2, or do they?
Yeah, so I mean, you generally can install multiple batteries if you so choose. So you could go, and I think the Tesla, for example, I think you can do up to 9 of the batteries, and they just string them all together, plug them in. So you could do that. Generally, it's so expensive, you really would not. And when we look at an average sized house, the tricky thing is we know how much power people use on average throughout a whole year. We don't know how much people use in the day versus at night. So making some assumptions around that, what we generally find is a Tesla battery is actually too big because you don't use that much power at night. You use it during the day, and then it's really hard to just sort of get that balance right of charging it up and then discharge it during the day, but your solar's shining, so it's trying to charge it up again. So it's just a bit of a mismatch of when you use the power and when you need it. But you could put multiple batteries together. And that's what people who are like off-grid out in the country who don't have that power line going past would do. They generally put a few batteries together, and in case of emergency, they put a little diesel generator somewhere in case the solar panels break down or if it rains for a fortnight, you could turn your diesel generator on.
If at night thunderstorm and you lose power, does that shut down if you've got light in your battery from keeping the household lit up?
It can. It depends on how the battery's configured. So a lot of people think, I've got a battery, I'm covered for every storm. But you need to actually have it configured that way. Because what you can find with a lot of systems is the easiest, cheapest way to configure them is they need this teeny tiny amount of power from the grid just for the inverter to be awake and to control everything. So you have power in, power out. The grid goes down, you've got all this power there and you can't use it. It's quite possible to change that around. It's just a matter of asking for it. And what we're seeing is more and more batteries are just defaulting to being able to go through a storm because that's the expectation of the market. If I'm going out and spending between like $7,000 and $12,000 on a battery, what's the point if I can't use it in a storm or if there's a big blackout for a couple of days? At least I could run my fridge and not lose all my food, sort of thing. So that they're moving that way, but they're not definitely that way.
Because if you don't have a battery and you have a power blackout,
that's right.
Your solar
exactly, yeah. So your solar system will not work during a blackout. So even if you had a blackout during the middle of the day, the sun's shining, your solar system won't work because it needs that little bit of power. And it's also a safety feature because if you've got people who've got to be working on the wires, on poles and wires outside your house in the street, if your solar system's generating, it's putting power into those wires when they assume it's not live and making it an electric shock. So it's a safety feature as well.
Hot water heat pumps connect into your solar?
Good question. I'm not 100% certain on that. My understanding is that they can, but you generally wouldn't do it just because of how sporadic solar can be. So if you look at solar output, it kind of looks like a bell curve. It starts at nothing, it goes up to the top in the middle of the day when the sun's shining brightly. That's on a normal sunny day, no clouds in the sky. If you look at it when it's a cloudy day, your solar output's jumping up and down. It can be at full power for 5 minutes and then back to zero in 5 minutes later just because this happens to be cloud cover over your roof. And as I understand it, that can cause issues with the heat pumps, the power on-off type of thing. So I understand they generally don't do it that way.
We all done? Tom's getting away. All right. Well, Theo, for somebody who said they didn't have a lot of technical information, good, great. So I know there's a lot of practical information for us as consumers there, and there's also a lot of great information for our assessment team. So thank you very much, and show our appreciation.
Did you?
Right.